Hi, I'm Emily. My mother kicked me out on my birthday. With a smile and an audience, she handed me an eviction notice like it was a greeting card. The worst part? Everyone clapped. They said I was too sensitive, too dramatic. They sold my childhood memories, erased my name from the family tree. And when I fought back, they called it betrayal. But what if I told you? That wasn't even the cruelest thing they did. The envelope was cream-colored, heavy stock, with a wax seal that looked more like Leora's taste than my mother's. My name, well, not exactly, was scrawled across it in thick cursive. Emilie Johnson. Not Emily. Not even M. Just wrong. I stood in the kitchen of my apartment in Raleigh, holding the invitation like it might bite. The return address confirmed what I already knew: my mother's home in Asheville. I flipped the card open with cautious fingers. You are invited to celebrate a milestone birthday with family and friends. It didn't mention whose birthday, but the date matched mine. I scanned every word on the card twice. Nowhere was my name mentioned, aside from the misprint on the envelope. Not a single mention of our Emily or come home. Just a standard RSVP line and Leora's email. Not my mother's. I sat down at the kitchen table. The envelope still in my hand, my stomach twisting with that familiar cocktail of unease and hope. This wasn't an oversight. This was deliberate. They don't see me anymore. I whispered it, barely audible, to the apartment walls that had become more home to me than the one I grew up in. I packed light, a carry-on, a weekender bag, and the smallest flicker of optimism I could fit into the side pouch. I hadn't stayed overnight in that house in almost 4 years. Visits had been brief, usually a dinner and a silent countdown to escape. I filled my gas tank at the corner station and pointed my car west. My thoughts ran faster than my tires. I kept recalling the exact tone in my mother's last voicemail. Flat, like reading from a script. You should come this year. Leora's organizing it. Not, I miss you. Not, I want to see you. Just Leora. She always had the right clothes, the right tone, the kind of manners that impressed people at church luncheons. And she knew it. So did my mother. Growing up, Leora was our sweet girl, while I was a handful. Over time, I learned to show up less, speak softer, smile on cue. But nothing ever felt enough. Still, I clung to Maya Angelou's words. When someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time. But I hadn't. Not yet. Maybe this year would be different. Maybe. When I pulled into the driveway, the house looked exactly the same. White shutters, manicured roses, a flagpole with the faded American flag. Nothing had changed. And that's what made it so unsettling. I rang the doorbell even though I had a key. The chime echoed. Roxalana opened the door, apron on, hair curled into a tight bun. You're early, she said, frowning. I haven't even finished setting the table. Good to see you too, I replied, stepping in. She gave me a tight-lipped smile, no hug. Leora's in the kitchen. She's organizing the appetizers. I walked past the hallway photos, still there. Still only photos of Leora's graduation, her engagement, her last trip to California. None of me, not even the faded second-grade portrait I remembered. Leora passed me carrying a tray of wine glasses. Oh, hey, she said, not stopping. Need help? I offered. She shrugged. Nah, I've got it. In the living room, I heard someone say, Is that the friend from Raleigh? I turned to see the new housekeeper smiling at me. Welcome, she said cheerfully. Miss Roxalana told us her guest would arrive early. Guest. I swallowed hard. I was introduced as the guest in my own family's home. I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror. My blouse looked too bold. My earrings too bright. I didn't belong here. Not really. Dinner was set for 7. At 6:30, I noticed a printed seating chart placed on the buffet. I wasn't looking for drama. I just wanted to know where to sit. But my fingers froze when they found my name. Emilie Johnson, family friend. Not Emily. Not daughter, not even niece, just family friend. I looked around. Uncle Bob had beloved brother. Nana Jo had matriarch. Leora? Leora, first daughter. I felt the air thicken. I took the card to Roxalana, who was arranging dessert spoons. "Hey," I said quietly. "My place card. It says family friend." She glanced at it. "It's just a misprint. Don't be so sensitive." I waited for her to look me in the eye. She didn't. "Of course," I said. I forced a smile, folded the card, and tucked it into my purse. This wasn't a typo. This was strategy. Dinner began with small talk. Cousin Natalie talked about her new baby. Leora shared highlights from her latest wellness retreat. I sipped wine and counted seconds between bites. Halfway through the meal, Roxalana stood to introduce a new neighbor seated across from me. "This is Emilie," she said, voice calm and cool. "She used to stay with us." The table went quiet for a beat. Then a few awkward chuckles. I felt all eyes tilt toward me. "Used to stay." "I live in Raleigh," I said, trying to mask the crack in my voice. "Still freelance full-time, not far." "That's nice," the neighbor said kindly, offering a toast. I lifted my glass but didn't drink. The taste in my mouth was already bitter enough. I thought of my 10th birthday, no cake, of the 16th, where they forgot I'd invited classmates, of the 25th, where I'd baked my own pie and watched them compliment Leora's store-bought cookies. It wasn't the forgetting that hurt. It was the deliberate remembering of someone else instead. After dessert, I slipped away to the guest bathroom. I stared at the faucet's slow drip and saw my own face in the fogged-up mirror. Who was I to them now? An extra? A prop? A placeholder? I didn't cry. I didn't clench my jaw. I just stared. I texted Ayala as I stood outside on the back porch. "You ever felt like you walked into a party you weren't invited to? Except it's your name on the cake?" She replied within seconds. "You still have a voice. Use it. Don't let them narrate your life." I looked through the window at the family laughing over half-eaten cake. Maybe I came here to be part of something, but maybe I needed to come back to end it. The laughter drifted up from downstairs, muffled but unmissable. I sat on the edge of the bed in the guest room, curling my fingers around the edge of the comforter, listening to the clinking of glasses and the rise and fall of conversations that no longer needed me. The dress I wore was simple. I hadn't planned to wear black on my birthday, but it fit the mood better than I expected. I brushed invisible lint from the hem and glanced toward the hallway. From this angle, I could just make out the corner where our old family photo collage used to hang. I stood, opened the door slowly, and stepped into the hall. It was gone, replaced by a new painting, abstract, in blues and grays, cold colors for a colder memory. A photo of Leora and my mother sat on the hallway table, both of them posed in front of the fireplace, champagne flutes raised. The frame read, "Power Duo, Thanksgiving Gala 2022. No trace of me." Not even the silly photo from my 8th grade spelling bee where I had a milk mustache and held up a gold ribbon. A quote from my therapist echoed, uninvited. "When people erase you from their present, they've already erased you from their future." I wasn't sure what hurt more, that they'd replaced the photo wall or that no one had bothered to mention it. I walked back into the room, sat on the bed again, and stared at the blank wall across from me. Should I confront her, say it out loud? Or would that just give her more to throw back at me? I made my way toward the living room, following the buzz of voices. The closer I got, the more disconnected I felt, like I was walking into a scene someone else had scripted. Then I saw it. A new framed family tree displayed proudly above the mantel. Fresh ink, clean lines, the kind of thing that screams, "Look how perfect we are." Every branch was labeled, every grandchild and cousin accounted for. Except me. Where my name once sat, handwritten by Sophrona in his blocky, deliberate handwriting, there was now a blank space, as if I'd never existed, as if his ink had never touched paper for me. I stepped closer. My hands curled into fists before I even realized they had. No one noticed me standing there. Not Leora, who was pouring wine. Not my mother, who breezed past me holding a tray of canapés. She glanced at the frame, then at me. "We updated it for accuracy," she said, like she was correcting a typo in a grocery list. I stared at her. She didn't flinch, just walked past like the conversation was over before it even began. It wasn't a mistake. This was deliberate. This wasn't an oversight. This was erasure. Later that night, I sat alone in the guest room. The lights from the yard still glowed through the curtains, casting faint shadows across the bedspread. I scrolled through my phone, trying to calm my thoughts. Then I saw it. A Facebook post. Public. From Roxalana. The whole family gathered tonight, so proud of what we've built together. Attached was a photo of the dinner table, everyone smiling, laughing, Leora's husband making a goofy face, the new neighbors mid-toast. I wasn't in it, not just absent, cropped. I had sat at that table, I'd toasted with that wine, but you'd never know. The comments poured in. Beautiful family. Such joy. Wish I could have been there. I didn't cry. My eyes stayed dry, but my throat clenched. I took a screenshot and sent it to Ayala. Message. When you're missing from your own mother's definition of family, you start questioning if you were ever really part of it. Her reply was quick, sharp. That's not a family. That's branding. I lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling. The shadows had shifted, but the weight on my chest hadn't. I thought back to the first time Roxalana told me I was too much for this house. I was 17, had spoken out during a dinner, said something about how Leora never helped clean up. My mother's voice had been cold, clear. If you can't be agreeable, maybe don't be here at all. And slowly I stopped being there. The holiday letters stopped including my updates after 2016. No more mentions of my freelance work, my small design win, the nonprofit I'd helped brand. They highlighted Leora's Pilates certification, her charity brunches, even the puppy she adopted with her husband. I remember reading one line that said, "Our youngest is finding her way, living out of town, always a free spirit." That was code for, we don't mention her unless we have to. Now the silence had turned into deletion, but this birthday wasn't a breaking point. It was a reveal. It didn't shatter anything. It simply confirmed what had already been quietly dismantled. I reached for my journal, flipped to a clean page, and wrote a single line. I'm not invisible. I've just been standing in the wrong frame. I started packing just after midnight. Not out of anger, not out of sadness, out of clarity. I folded my clothes carefully, placed them into the weekender I had never fully unpacked. I left the guest room light on. I walked slowly through the hall, pausing briefly by the new family tree. My absence now immortalized behind glass. No one was upstairs. No one would stop me. I looked toward the dining room where I could still hear faint laughter and the hum of a dishwasher cycling. They were laughing like nothing happened, like I was just a passing breeze that didn't ruffle the napkins. I stood at the top of the stairs, hand on the rail. You made your choice, Mom, I whispered. Now I'll make mine. And with that, I stepped into the dark, not as someone fleeing, but as someone who finally understood the difference between being invited and being welcomed. The house was still, not quiet in a peaceful way, but hollow, like the air had been vacuumed out overnight. I woke before the sun, eyes wide open in the dark, back aching from the old mattress that still creaked with every breath. It felt like the walls had been watching me sleep. Downstairs, the clink of dishes and soft laughter broke the silence. She actually came, Leora said, voice light as a feather. Roxalana answered with a soft chuckle. I didn't think she had it in her. Another laugh. A drawer opened. The kettle hissed. I lay still, eyes on the ceiling, listening to them move about like I was just a shadow they'd forgotten to erase. There was no knock, no good morning, no sign that my presence in their house required acknowledgement. I reached for my phone on the nightstand. One message blinked on the screen. Ayala, you okay? You left me hanging last night. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. What could I say that didn't feel like whining? I stared at the words before typing slowly. Ever felt like you've been ghosted in real life, by your own blood? I didn't wait for a response. I stood, tied my hair back, and considered grabbing my bag, but some part of me said, not yet. I went downstairs, aiming for the kitchen. The smell of cinnamon and toast made my stomach twist, memories trying to comfort a reality that didn't deserve it. As I poured a cup of tea, I noticed the drawer by the fridge was cracked open, like someone had meant to close it but didn't. Inside was a mix of documents, old warranties, receipts, and something else. A folded paper, yellowed at the corners. I pulled it out. It was a hospital form. My name at the top. Dated 8 years ago. The reason for visit? Outpatient procedure. I knew what it was before I finished reading. The room spun for a second. Flashback. I was 21. Sitting at that very table, stomach knotted, hands clenched in my lap. I'd told Roxalana, trying to be brave, "I'm pregnant." She didn't flinch. "You think I'm raising someone else's mistake?" she said. I remember how she poured herself a glass of wine, sipped it without looking at me. "If you want to live here," she continued, "that baby goes." I didn't scream. I didn't argue. I just nodded. Leora was the one who drove me to the clinic. We sat in silence the whole way. She parked in the back lot, turned to me, and said, "Don't tell anyone. Ever." That was winter. I never came back that season. Back in the kitchen now, I folded the form, slid it into my pocket. They didn't just exile me emotionally. They had it documented. I returned to the guest room, tea cooling in my hand, and tried to distract myself. I opened Facebook, scrolled past birthday messages from acquaintances and college friends. Then something caught my eye on Marketplace. A listing. Local. Vintage keepsake box, $15, pickup only. The photo was dim, but I recognized it immediately. The box was small, oak-colored, hand-carved with the initials ERJ on the bottom. I'd made it in woodshop class when I was 10, spent weeks sanding it, staining it, getting splinters just to make the lid close evenly. I gave it to Roxalana for her birthday. She cried when she opened it, said it was the most thoughtful gift she'd ever received. Now, she was selling it like clutter. I didn't hesitate. I walked down the stairs and into the living room, where she was adjusting a vase of flowers. "Why is my box on Marketplace?" I asked, holding up my phone. She barely blinked. It was taking up space. It had my initials on it. "You don't live here anymore, Emilie," she said calmly. "I didn't think you'd miss it." "It's not about missing it," I said, voice low but sharp. "It's about respect." "I'm not keeping every relic from a phase," she said, brushing past me. "It wasn't a phase," I muttered. She didn't stop walking. That night, I sat cross-legged on the bed with my journal open. The hospital form was tucked between its pages. I added the screenshot of the Marketplace listing next to it, visual proof. A trail of dismissal. I didn't cry. I didn't pace. I wrote, "They didn't just forget me, they rebranded me as a guest in my own origin story." I let the sentence sit on the page like a scar. I thought about the difference between being ignored and being deleted. One is passive, the other is surgical. A line from Toni Morrison came to mind. "If you want to fly, you have to give up the things that weigh you down." So I started a list. Things they can't take from me. My words, my memories, my story, my voice, my proof. The list grew. I wrote until my hand cramped, until the tea went cold again. They couldn't take what they never owned. I gathered the items carefully, the hospital form, the Marketplace screenshot, the family tree photo, all placed neatly in a folder labeled "For Later." The next morning, I walked past Roxalana on my way to the porch. She was sipping her coffee, scrolling through her tablet like the past few days hadn't happened. "I'll be needing a copy of Dad's will," I said. She looked up, startled. "Why?" I smiled, tight, contained. "Because I remember more than you think." I stood alone in the kitchen, the sunlight creeping in through the blinds but warming nothing. The room was staged, polished surfaces, a citrus-clean scent, floral centerpiece already beginning to wilt. I poured a cup of coffee and sat at the end of the counter, listening. Leora's voice floated in from the dining room, sharp and casual. "We should just go ahead and move everything. Mom doesn't need to stress over it." "Exactly," someone replied, maybe her husband. "Just clean it out and be done." Clean it out. I looked up toward the hallway. My high school portrait, the one with braces and a crooked part, had been taken down. All that remained was a faint square on the wall, surrounded by a slightly cleaner shade of paint. My chest tightened. Not because the picture was gone, but because no one said anything about it being taken down. I remembered something Nora Ephron once wrote. When your own family thinks you're disposable, you learn how to pack light. I stared at the coffee, steam curling up like a slow exhale. My fingers twitched toward my suitcase, sitting by the door, half packed. But instead, I turned and walked quietly up the stairs. There was one place in this house no one ever bothered to check. The attic. The ladder creaked as I climbed, dust floating around me like old ghosts. The smell hit first: cedar, mothballs, forgotten summer. Boxes lined the edges of the floor, labeled in Leora's handwriting. Seasonal, donations, to sort. I scanned until I found the gold paper. It was tucked beside a crate labeled Thanksgiving Decor. Neat corners, thin ribbon. A tag hanging off the edge read, "For Leora, from Mom." I sat cross-legged on the floor and gently unwrapped it. The moment I saw the grain of the wood, I knew. Cedar box. My box. I opened it slowly, and there it was, the tiny inscription on the inside of the lid. To Mom, love Emilie, 2005. I had spent 2 months building it in shop class. I was 10. The edges were uneven, the hinges clicked wrong, but I stained it myself, wrote the message in a Sharpie, and placed a dried flower inside before gifting it to her. She cried when I gave it to her, or at least she pretended to. Now she had rewrapped it for my sister. I didn't cry, but my jaw set hard enough to make my teeth ache. I stood, box in hand, and went straight down to the kitchen. Roxalana was slicing apples for some godforsaken pie. She didn't look up when I placed the box on the island between us. "What's this?" "You tell me." She glanced at the box, then at me. No shame, no hesitation. "Oh, that," she said, drying her hands. "You didn't want it anymore. At least Leora will appreciate it." I said nothing. She went back to slicing. "That wasn't yours to give," I said quietly. She shrugged. "Nothing in this house was ever truly yours." I turned and left the room, box in hand, her words echoing louder than the knife hitting the cutting board. Back in the guest room, I set the box on the bed and tried to breathe. My hands shook, not from sadness but fury. I needed to ground myself, so I started folding the clothes I'd left scattered. But when I opened the closet, my heart dropped. 3 cardboard boxes sat neatly stacked on the floor. One was labeled bedroom stuff. Another, books. The third, Maiski, Emilie. Inside were my clothes, my journals, even a set of earrings I'd left on the nightstand. One journal lay half open, the leather cover bent, lock broken. On top of it all sat a yellow sticky note. "Don't forget to take these with you. The closet needs clearing." My mouth went dry. I picked up the journal, ran my fingers over the damaged spine. They went through my things, my private pages, my stories. I dropped everything and walked down the hall, heart racing. The front door was wide open. Roxalana stood on the porch chatting with a neighbor. "Oh, she's just finishing up packing," she said to the woman in a pink sweater. "Moving forward, you know." I stepped outside, fists clenched. The neighbor smiled at me. "Big day, huh?" I didn't respond. I turned and walked back in, shutting the door behind me without a word. I sat on the bed, slowly unpacking everything. Each item I placed carefully, not because I was staying, but because I refused to let them decide what parts of me stayed hidden in a box. I opened a notepad from the nightstand, flipped to the last page, and wrote in the corner, "You don't get to erase me quietly." This wasn't about keepsakes anymore. It was about control, memory, space. Who gets to decide who belongs? I texted Ayala. "She's erasing me while I'm still here." Her reply came fast. "That's her mistake." "You're not leaving quietly." I walked into the study that evening, just before dusk. The old file cabinet stood by the window, untouched for years. It had belonged to my stepfather. He used to keep tax forms, receipts, and estate paperwork in perfect manila rows. I opened the top drawer. The scent of paper and tobacco hit me all at once. My fingers ran over the folders. health insurance, pension, mortgage. Then, tucked in the back, one labeled Tax 2018. Inside was nothing unusual, a few stapled sheets, but at the very bottom there was a small post-it, faded and curling at the edges. Black ink. A voice I hadn't heard in years. If she tries it, go to Ayala. I sat down slowly, heart thudding. The handwriting wasn't Roxalana's, it was Sofrona's. I sat alone in the study, the same one Sofrona used to retreat to when the house got too loud. The post-it note still rested on the desk where I left it, its ink faded, but his handwriting unmistakable. He always wrote in capital letters, the kind you couldn't mistake for anyone else's. If she tries it, go to Ayala. It hadn't left my mind since I found it. I stood, walked down the hall, and entered my old room. If I could even call it that anymore. The bottom drawer of my desk was stiff. No one ever opened it but me. I'd kept a few things there, mostly old bank slips and a ceramic coin jar I painted in middle school. The jar was there, emptied, lid missing. Next to it sat a printed receipt, one of my own transfers from 3 years ago. I'd wired home a few thousand then, when Mom said she was in a tight spot with the mortgage. I remembered her voicemail that week. Things are tough. If you can send a little, it'll help us stay afloat. I hadn't asked questions. I just sent the money. Now the receipt sat here like a trophy, folded clean, tucked away, like someone had filed it under useful when needed. They didn't just dismiss me, I whispered. They redirected what I built. I grabbed my bag, heart pounding, and walked out without closing the drawer. Text to Ayala. You home? Her reply came in seconds. Come over. I've got tea. And battery-charged rage. Ayala's apartment always smelled like jasmine and legal warnings. I didn't knock. She opened the door before I could raise my hand. You look like someone who just found a will signed in blood, she said. Not quite, I said, stepping in. But I did find my money, just not where I left it. We sat at her kitchen table. I opened my laptop, logged into my old bank account. The numbers didn't lie. See that? Monthly transfers. From me to what was supposed to be our shared savings. Ayala scrolled, her brow furrowed. And this secondary account? That's not mine. She clicked deeper. Routing details, connected account holder, Leora J. Ridley. She leaned back in her chair. Jesus, Emilie. I funded her tuition, didn't I? Looks like it. I sat back. My fingers tapped the table, too slow to keep up with my thoughts. She said the house needed repairs. Said Mom was drowning in debt. Ayala didn't say anything, just watched me unravel. I've been working 2 jobs, picking up extra clients, eating dollar ramen some weeks. You want to confront them now? She asked gently. I looked at her. No, I want to collect. And then I want to end it. I got back to the house around 9. The driveway was full. I parked by the curb and walked in through the back. I didn't want to see anyone. I just wanted to be ready when it mattered. As I moved quietly through the hallway, I heard Roxalana's voice. Calm, controlled, on speakerphone. No, I don't want Emilie listed anywhere. She's been out of state for years. A man on the other end said something I couldn't hear. She continued, only Leora is the beneficiary. That's how Sofrona would have wanted it. There it was. Plain as day. I pulled out my phone, pressed record, let it capture the last 15 seconds. Then I stepped forward and let the floorboard creak deliberately. She froze. The phone line cut off. I didn't flinch. Evening, I said. She turned around slowly, lips tightening. Didn't know you were still awake. I'm wide awake now, I replied. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. I walked past her without another word, my phone still in hand. Outside, the air was cool, still holding the breath of spring. I sat on the porch, staring at the trees in the distance. Somewhere beyond them, people were living lives untouched by these politics, people who didn't have to fight to exist in their own families. I opened the voice memo app and hit record. They built an entire structure with my silence as the foundation. Pause. And now they're shocked to feel the walls shift. I looked back at the house, at the warm lights glowing inside. at the figures moving through the curtains. Not long ago, that sight would have made me ache. Now, it made me plan. I pulled out my journal, turned to a clean page, and titled it, Assets They Forgot I Noticed. I listed them out one by one. The stolen bank transfers, the jewelry box, the erased family tree, the Facebook listing, the recorded call. Each item was its own line of proof, each one a step closer to reclaiming not just what was mine, but what was right. I texted Ayala again. We go legal next week. She replied instantly. We'll hit where it hurts, paper trails and courtrooms. I set a reminder on my phone. Friday, file preliminary claim with Ayala. Not a maybe, not a to-do. A done deal. As I stood, a breeze passed through the porch, brushing my hair across my cheek. I turned back toward the house. One by one, the lights began to shut off. Kitchen, hallway, upstairs bedroom. It wasn't the end of the night. It was the end of pretending. They erased me from the past, I said to no one. Let's see them erase me from court. The house felt like a mausoleum, still, controlled, hiding something under every layer of paint. I got up early, earlier than usual, drawn by the eerie sense that something was shifting in the silence. I stepped into the hallway, the wood cool beneath my feet, and immediately noticed it. A new photo. Hung right where our family portrait used to be. There stood Leora and Roxalana, arm in arm at some charity gala, both in coordinated pastel suits, smiling like they'd never had a blemish between them. No space for history, no room for me. I passed by my door. It was slightly open, but the light was off. No one had come looking for me. No one had even knocked. In the kitchen, the hum of the fridge was the only sound. I poured myself coffee and leaned against the counter, letting the bitterness of it settle on my tongue. You don't become what you want, you become what you believe. That quote from Michelle Obama echoed, clear as if someone had spoken it beside me. I looked down into the cup and whispered, I don't believe them anymore. Breakfast was late. I didn't rush. Leora was already seated, phone in hand, scrolling. Roxalana hovered near the stove, plating something that smelled expensive but forgettable. I took my place at the end of the table, like a guest at a hotel breakfast bar. So, I began, slicing into the silence. I found the note from Sophrona. Leora's thumb paused mid-scroll. Roxalana stiffened. What note? She asked, too casual. In his files, I replied. He wanted me to have something, said to go to Ayala if things went sideways. You think that note makes you entitled? She snapped, voice sharp enough to cut steel. You've always been a problem, Emilie, always the outsider. Leora looked up. Mom. But Roxalana held up a hand. I'm done pretending, she said, eyes fixed on me. You're not even part of this family anymore. Stop acting like we owe you anything. I swallowed. Let the words land. Thank you, I said calmly, for finally saying it out loud. Now I don't have to pretend either. Back in my room, I sat on the edge of the bed and pulled out my phone. I scrolled through old voicemails, landing on the one I knew would still be there. 5 years ago, my college graduation. Roxalana's voice, proud, affectionate. So proud of you, baby girl. My daughter, making it in the world. Come home soon, okay? I played it again and again. Each time, the voice felt further away. Since then, every message from her had been logistical. Transactions disguised as maternal check-ins. Bring dessert if you're coming. Can you forward me that email? Never again had she called me my daughter. I stared at the phone screen, thumb hovering over delete. I pressed it, gone. Not as an act of grief, but of liberation. That word no longer belonged to her. I drove into town. Asheville was always a balm when everything else stung. People walking dogs, reading paperbacks on benches, sipping coffee from chipped mugs in cozy corners. I found a seat at a small cafe tucked near a bookstore and watched 2 parents with toddlers juggle sippy cups and napkins. The children giggled, the parents smiled, the world spun without collapsing. I opened my journal. You're not broken because they rejected you, I wrote. You're powerful because you stayed kind through it. I closed the book and called Ayala. We're pushing forward, I told her. Filing starts Monday. She didn't ask if I was sure. I've already drafted the paperwork, she said, and I'll have a copy ready for the notary. We said nothing else. Nothing else needed to be said. That evening, I returned to the house. The tension was thick, but no one spoke it aloud. Roxalana sat in the living room, eyes on the TV, volume low. Leora was nowhere to be seen. I walked into the kitchen and set 2 plates on the table. Poured orange juice into the good glasses, the ones they used for holiday brunches. Roxalana didn't move until I placed a fork beside her. She looked at me with cautious confusion. "This will be our last breakfast," I said, my voice steady. She opened her mouth, but I cut her off gently. "I suggest you eat your words while they're still warm." Silence fell. She stared, lips slightly parted, but said nothing. I folded a napkin slowly and placed it on the table beside her. I wasn't waiting for her to speak anymore. This time, the next move was mine. I needed air, the kind that didn't carry the weight of 100 unsaid things. I stepped outside, letting the screen door creak and slam behind me, hoping it would echo louder than the silence inside. The sidewalk was still damp from the night's light rain. I walked aimlessly, letting my feet lead, trying to calm the simmering pressure in my chest. The breakfast had ended with no words, no explosions, just 2 women eating in complete silence. But sometimes silence cuts deeper than shouting. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was Devon. "Just saw your mom at church. She invited me over. Everything okay?" My stomach turned. Of course she did this. Roxalana used to parade Devon around like a prize. "He grounds you," she once said. "He's the only one who could ever handle your fire." Translation: he knew how to keep me quiet. I turned on my heel and headed back toward the house. My pace quickened. I didn't knock. When I stepped into the living room, Devon was already there. So, sitting on the edge of the couch like he owned it, sipping from one of my mother's company mugs, laughing with Leora. He said, half standing. "I didn't know you'd be here." "Really?" I said flatly. "In my mother's house? After she invited you behind my back?" Leora stood, tried to smooth it over. "It was just a coincidence. He stopped by." Roxalana entered, perfectly timed. "Look who dropped by," she said, smiling like we were at some high society brunch. "Thought it'd be nice to catch up." I didn't blink. "You invited him. You knew exactly what that would do." Her face didn't flinch. "I thought you'd want to see someone who once cared for you. Lord knows you've pushed everyone else away." Devon stepped back. "I honestly thought it was a friendly visit. She said the family was getting together, that's all." I turned to him. "You were always good at missing the fine print, weren't you?" He opened his mouth to defend himself, but shut it. "I'll go." And just like that, he walked out. I stood in the hallway for a moment. Then, slowly, I reached up and pulled down the first framed photo from the wall. Me at 6 years old, missing a tooth. Gone. Next, the Christmas 1998 family photo. Gone. Each frame hit the floor with a soft thud as I moved down the line. Roxalana didn't stop me. She just turned back toward the kitchen. That night, just before bed, my phone buzzed again. Email from Leora. Subject: Event cost share. Emilie, since you've been staying for several days, Mom asked me to forward the party costs for fairness. Please see the attached breakdown. Total is $783. Let me know how you'd like to split it. Best, Leora. Attached was a spreadsheet. Flowers, $122. Catering, $450. Cake, $88. Paper napkins, $18. Printed signs, custom labels, scented candles. It read like an invoice for an event I was tricked into starring in. I didn't reply immediately. Instead, I opened my banking app, scrolled to an old wire transfer from 5 years ago, $12,200 sent to Roxalana when she said the roof was leaking and she didn't have enough for repairs. I never asked her to pay it back, never even brought it up. Until now, I took a screenshot, attached it in my reply. Subject: You forgot who paid first, and I copied Ayala. No further comment. The porch had always been my retreat, but tonight it felt different, less about escape, more about control. I sat with my journal, flipping to a clean page. I drew 2 columns: left, harm; right, leverage. Under harm, I wrote, childhood photos removed, bank transfers stolen, public humiliation via seating chart, identity denied, Devon ambush, passive eviction, voicemail deletion. Under leverage, recording from the legal office call, post-it from Safrona, marketplace listing, missing family tree, Devon's text, wire transfer screenshot. I stared at the page, then circled one word at the bottom of the right column, leverage. I pulled out my phone and messaged Ayala, full asset list and notes coming tonight. This isn't just a lawsuit anymore. It's my reckoning. The house was quiet again. Too quiet. I stood in the hallway, now bare, all the photos gone, all the moments scrubbed. To anyone else, it would look like remodeling. To me, it looked like recovery. I touched the empty nail where the 2002 summer trip photo used to hang and whispered, if they want a war, they picked the wrong daughter to underestimate. I stood in front of the mirror, smoothing out the soft navy fabric of the dress I hadn't worn in years. It still fit, even if the occasion didn't. My hair curled at the ends the way Safrona used to compliment, saying I looked like a storm with soft edges. The makeup was minimal, just enough to make me appear polished, like someone worth inviting to her own birthday. Downstairs, I could hear clinks of glass, laughter that felt rehearsed, and the shuffle of heels across tile. I walked down slowly. The dining room was decked in pastel tones, soft lilacs and blush pinks, scattered with birthday banners and floral arrangements. None of them said my name. Not one said, "Happy birthday, Emilie." Just, "Celebrate new beginnings," in golden calligraphy. Leora met me halfway with a glass of wine, her smile thin and performative. "You clean up well," she said, passing me the glass. "You look like a catalog," I replied, not quite returning the compliment. Roxalana floated between guests, greeting each one with warmth I hadn't seen in years. She wore a powder blue blazer and pearls, standard Southern charm, weaponized with precision. I took my seat at the far end of the table, across from someone I didn't recognize. Roxalana leaned in and whispered just loud enough, "That's Devon's new girlfriend. Isn't she sweet?" I clenched my jaw. It wasn't a party, it was a performance, and I was the prop. After the main course, Roxalana stood, gently clinking her glass with a silver knife. "Thank you all for coming," she began, smiling at the crowd like a pageant queen. "It's always a blessing to gather with loved ones. Tonight is about celebrating growth, letting go of the old and embracing what's next." She turned to me, extended a hand, and pressed an envelope into my palm. "To new beginnings," she said, raising her glass. Everyone followed, murmuring toasts I couldn't hear over the roar in my ears. I opened the envelope slowly, hands steady, heart racing. Inside was a notarized letter, a notice of eviction. Final. Dated 3 weeks ago. Attached was a printed message. Effective immediately. You are no longer a resident of this household. My name, my birthday, and a formal dismissal. I looked up. Roxalana was still smiling, glass lifted, unmoved by the bomb she'd just dropped. A few guests shifted awkwardly in their chairs. The woman next to me stared at her salad. I whispered, "So, this was your birthday surprise." The room fell into uneasy silence for just a moment, until Roxalana raised her voice once more, clearly not done. "And one more thing," she said cheerfully. "We'll be converting Emilie's room into extra storage. It's time to repurpose the space. We're all moving forward, right?" No one reacted. Not a single guest looked at me. Leora avoided my gaze, hands clasped around her wine glass as if bracing for a storm. I set my fork down carefully, took the cloth napkin from my lap, dabbed the corners of my mouth, and placed it gently on the plate. "Thank you," I said, loud enough for everyone to hear. For finally saying it in front of witnesses. I reached into my clutch and pulled out my phone, opened the voice memo app, pressed record, set it face up in the middle of the table. "Roxalana," I began, my voice clear, unwavering. "For the record, I will vacate the property once my attorney clears my claim to what is legally mine." A gasp. Someone dropped their spoon. Devon blinked, visibly stunned. No one else moved. No one spoke. I rose from my chair slowly, adjusted my dress, smiled at the woman beside me who had offered no words, only the courtesy of shared discomfort. "Thank you for the wine," I said softly. I walked upstairs, each step deliberate, passing portraits that no longer included me. My room was dark, the suitcase already packed. I zipped it closed, took one last glance around, and carried it down the hall. At the bottom of the stairs, I paused in front of Roxalana. "You thought I'd cry," I said. "But I only ever cried when I thought you loved me." She flinched. Barely. I turned and walked out the front door. The air outside was crisp, the night still young. For the first time in days, I breathed freely. At the edge of the porch, I paused, reached into my coat pocket, and pulled out a folded letter, sealed with wax. I slid it into the drawer of the console table by the door, where she kept the emergency flashlights and spare batteries, a place she'd check eventually when no one else was around. The outside of the envelope read, "Inheritance you can't touch." I whispered into the empty entryway, "Open it when you're finally alone. It'll hit harder that way." Then I walked down the steps, suitcase in hand, spine straight, and didn't look back. I woke up on Ayala's couch with the kind of exhaustion that didn't sit in the bones. It lived in the lungs, the kind that made every breath feel heavier than the last. The city outside moved as usual, the sounds of garbage trucks and dogs barking faint beneath the sealed windows, but I couldn't shake the eerie stillness I carried inside. Ayala was already up, standing in her kitchen barefoot, hair tied up, legal pads scattered across the counter like war maps. She poured coffee into two mismatched mugs and slid one across the table toward me. "You look like someone who just crossed a finish line and realized there's another lap," she said. "I feel like it," I admitted, wrapping my hands around the cup for warmth more than caffeine. She opened the folder I'd handed her last night, the one with the notarized documents, the screenshot of the eviction, and my own letter. "This," she said, pointing at the envelope, "was surgical, firm but not cruel." I sipped and nodded. "You left just enough of a wound for it to sting, but not enough to draw sympathy. It's the cleanest slice I've ever seen." I smiled faintly. "It wasn't revenge, it was self-defense." "Same thing in some families," Ayala muttered, flipping another page. I braced myself for what was coming next. Because no matter how well I delivered that final act, I knew the encore wouldn't be mine. The ping came at noon. A group message I didn't recognize. I opened it instinctively, not realizing what I was walking into. It was a message from Roxalana. "We finally got rid of her. She won't ruin anything else. Thank God that's over." She had meant to send it to her inner circle. Leora, a few of the cousins, maybe a church friend or two. She accidentally included me. I stared at the words, read them twice, then a third time, just to be sure they were real. Got rid of her, like I was mold in the grout or a raccoon in the attic. I didn't feel sad. Not this time. Just cold. Like something inside had finally stopped spinning. I forwarded the message to Ayala. One sentence. "Let's double the claim." She called almost immediately. "You're serious?" she asked. "She wrote it herself. Got rid of her. We couldn't buy better evidence." That text just became your golden hammer. Later that afternoon, I sat across from Ayala at her office. She was flipping through papers like a surgeon preparing for an operation. "We're going to review everything again," she said, "including the old documents, anything Sophrona touched." We opened the estate files, and in the second stack, we found it, a copy of the original will, unmarked, unaltered. My name clearly listed as a co-owner on the secondary property, Sophrona's signature at the bottom. Mine beside it, dated, witnessed, stamped. Ayala looked up. "She forgot you signed." "She assumed I'd forget," I said. "She counted on me never checking." "She filed to remove your name a year ago," Ayala added, thumbing through the updated documents. "But this trumps everything." I ran my finger over the paper. "She tried to lock me out of everything. She forgot I held a key." Ayala nodded. "We serve her midweek." Good, I said. Let her read it the way I read that eviction notice, surrounded by people who'll pretend not to notice. That evening, I walked through a small park on the edge of town, holding a manila folder under my arm. Inside was the will, a printout of the group text, and a draft of the updated legal complaint. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel angry. I felt finished. Not defeated, just finally finished. I sat on a bench, journal open on my lap, and wrote, "Power isn't always about speaking louder. Sometimes it's about having the receipts." I watched a child feed ducks near the water, listened to the wind move through leaves, thought about Sophrona. He would have hated this. He would have told her to stop long before it came to lawyers and recordings. He would have told her family isn't leverage, but he was gone, and she had rewritten history while the ink was still wet on his obituary. "I'm not coming back," I said aloud, softly, "but I'm not running anymore either." At dusk, I drove back to the old house, not to talk, not to be seen. I stood at the bottom step, the same one I used to sit on as a child when I wanted to be alone, but still within shouting distance of love. In my hand was a sealed envelope with the updated claim inside. My signature across every page. I knelt, placed it on the welcome mat, and pulled out my phone. Snap. Time-stamped. Then I peeled a small yellow post-it from my wallet and stuck it to the top. It read, "Since I was never part of the family, consider this just business." I stood. I didn't knock, didn't pause. I turned and walked back to the car. The court confirmation came by email, as sterile and unceremonious as any piece of bureaucracy could be. Defendant notified, verified delivery. A scan of Roxalana's signature stared back at me, still perfectly looped, even under pressure. I stared at it in silence, sipping lukewarm coffee from a chipped mug at Ayala's kitchen table. "How do you feel?" she asked, watching me carefully. "I used to shrink when I thought she was mad at me," I said, barely above a whisper. "Now, I just wonder what face she's wearing today." Ayala nodded. "She'll show her true face now. Count on it." I looked at her and said calmly, "Good, let everyone see it." And I meant it. It didn't take long. That afternoon, Ayala's office received a frantic voicemail from Roxalana's attorney. Apparently, the letter I'd left, the one tucked so neatly into her console table, had landed like a grenade. It outlined emotional manipulation, verbal degradation, documentation of years of abuse, complete with timelines, names of witnesses, and screenshots. I'd spent hours crafting it, piecing together my history like a forensic detective. The language was direct, intentional, never cruel, but devastatingly clear. Ayala leaned back in her chair after reading it. "That wasn't just a letter," she said. "That was a strategic bomb." I nodded. "I wrote it at 3 a.m. The house was dead quiet. I didn't even shake." I remembered every line. "You told me I was replaceable, so I replaced the silence with evidence." The reaction was swift. Leora, who hadn't texted me in over a month, sent a message that evening. "Can we talk?" I didn't respond. That letter wasn't just about my mother. It was about reclaiming the narrative, and she hated not being the narrator anymore. The next morning, a friend sent me a screenshot from Facebook. Roxalana had posted a photo. A blurry one of me at age 7, sitting at a piano, back slightly turned, face barely visible. The caption read, "Happy birthday to my daughter. May she learn grace and humility as she matures." Beneath it, comments poured in. "You're a great mom. She'll come around someday. Such strength and class." I didn't comment, didn't like it, didn't report it. Instead, I opened Instagram and typed, "Silence is not peace. Grace is not denial. Humility is not erasure." I left it there, simple, on a blank background. No hashtags, no mention of her name. The next day, an old acquaintance messaged me privately. "She's trying to control the narrative," they wrote. I replied, "Not this time." Later that week, I walked into a local bookstore, needing something tactile, something that smelled like stories not controlled by anyone else. A woman I barely knew approached me near the memoir section. Her hair was gray, her cardigan too big for her frame. "I just wanted to say," she whispered, You're stronger than I ever was. I watched it all unfold, quietly, and I wish I'd done what you're doing now. I nodded. Sometimes silence gets mistaken for consent. She squeezed my hand gently before walking away. I found a leather-bound journal on the back shelf, dark green, soft cover, thick pages. At the register, I bought it without hesitation. That night, I opened to the first page and wrote, I was never the storm. I was the dam that broke to make space for sunlight. It felt right, like the kind of sentence you carry in your pocket for years without realizing it. Before bed, I uploaded the court filing. I didn't blast it, didn't share it publicly, just linked it quietly on my page with one line. Transparency is self-defense. The knock came just after dinner. I wasn't expecting anyone. Most people didn't knock anymore. They texted from the driveway. I opened the door slowly, heart calm. Leora stood on the porch, hands in her coat pockets, no makeup, no pride left in her eyes. We stared at each other for a few seconds. Then she said, Mom's unraveling, and for once, I'm not sure I want to help her put it back together. I didn't speak. I just stepped aside and opened the door wider. I stared at the screen, waiting. Not for a response, at this point I knew better, but for confirmation that the silence was intentional. Last week, I sent an email to 14 family members, a detailed, calm, unflinching explanation of the past few months. My eviction, the legal proceedings, the truth that Roxalana had tried to bury under fake smiles and filtered photos. Only one reply came back. An automated vacation message. Nothing from the cousins I helped move into dorms. Nothing from the aunt who once cried at my piano recital. Not even a single "hope you're okay" from anyone who claimed to love me like a daughter. Ayala called that afternoon. You still sure you want to do this? She asked. I've never been clearer. Sometimes silence is louder than outrage. It tells you who was never listening in the first place. I sat on the edge of my bed that night, journal open, pen in hand. Every few minutes, my mind flashed back to childhood birthdays. Paper hats. Sticky frosting. Leora holding my hand when I was too shy to blow out the candles. Then it would shift. Graduation day. Me alone on the auditorium steps, while everyone crowded around Leora's nursing degree. The contrast hurt. Not because I wanted their praise anymore, but because I finally understood why it never came. They'd never seen me as an equal. Even now, after everything, not one of them had asked to hear my side. I scrolled through Facebook, stopping on a post from one of my cousins. A photo of her and Roxalana at brunch. The caption read, Support strong mothers. They sacrifice everything for their children. I didn't comment. I didn't need to. Instead, I documented it. Screenshot, date, caption. Silence is its own form of betrayal. But now I'm too loud to ignore. I closed the app and turned to a fresh page in my journal. Let the record show. Blood doesn't equal bond. The next day, Ayala and I sat across from each other, reviewing financial statements again. The older ones, buried behind years of more pressing pain. That one, I said, pointing. That's the transfer I made in 2019. For house repairs, right? She asked. I nodded. Ayala cross-referenced the timing with another set of documents and paused. Your brother's tuition was paid in full 3 days later. My stomach tightened. I hadn't asked for details back then, hadn't wanted to pry, but the numbers didn't lie. Leora answered when I called. Did Mom use my savings to pay for Jude's school? I asked. A pause. Then, casually, she said, He needed the education. You were out of the picture anyway. I was out of the picture because you all painted me out, I replied. Emilie? I'm not arguing, Leora. I'm adding it to the legal file. Click. I whispered into the empty room. I wasn't gone. I was discarded. Later that week, I visited Mrs. Henderson, our old neighbor who used to babysit us when Roxalana had charity meetings. She opened the door and wrapped me in a hug that smelled like cinnamon and lavender. I always knew you'd survive her, she whispered. She handed me a pie. Peach. Warm, homemade. You were always the one with the brightest eyes, she said. Don't let them dim you. I smiled, real and wide. On the walk home, I carried the pie in one hand, journal tucked beneath my arm. I stopped at a bench and wrote, I don't want revenge. I want space where I can breathe fully. When I got back to my apartment, I opened my phone and deleted the family group chat. One tap, gone, and I didn't hesitate. That evening, I was looking for a blank envelope in one of my drawers. Old receipts, expired coupons, a half-used booklet of stamps. Then I saw it. A yellow envelope. To Emilie, if she ever needs it. Sofrona's handwriting. My breath caught. Inside were legal documents, titles, letters, and one sealed envelope, written in ink on the outside. Use it when truth isn't enough. I sat down, the envelope trembling slightly in my hands. I didn't open it, not yet, but I knew one thing with absolute certainty. She wasn't the only one who knew how to play the long game. I sat at my kitchen table with the envelope in front of me, its edges yellowed, the handwriting on the front unmistakably Sofrona's. I'd seen it on birthday cards, notes left on the fridge, and his final will, always clean, always firm. To Emilie, if she ever needs it. It was time. I broke the seal carefully, not tearing the flap. Inside was a folded, notarized document and a short handwritten note clipped to the top. If she tries to erase you, this brings you back. The document was an amendment to his original will, naming me and me alone as the legal heir to the lakeside cabin Roxolana had always claimed as hers. I let out a slow breath, not relief, confirmation. I smiled faintly and whispered, I'm already back. By midday, Ayala had reviewed every detail. It's unbreakable, she said, flipping through the pages with a glint of satisfaction. And it's dated 6 months before he passed. No contest. I signed the transfer confirmation while she scanned a copy to file with the court. The next morning, Roxolana was served at her doorstep. Leora texted me within an hour. She screamed, then she went quiet. I've never seen her quiet. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Instead, I printed the deed to the cabin and pinned it to my vision board. Not as a trophy, but as a promise to myself. I wasn't just surviving, I was claiming. I wrote my final open letter 2 days later, not on social media, but a small community blog run by women in the area. Quiet warriors, survivors of things no one ever posts about. I didn't name anyone, didn't point fingers. I simply told a story. Some families use silence as a weapon. Some daughters stop being silent. Within days, it had been shared over 100 times. The messages came in slow and steady. I saw myself in your story. My mom made me feel the same way. Thank you for saying what I couldn't. And then came the invitations, speaking events, panels, book club meetings hosted by women who were done apologizing for not fitting into a role they never chose. At one gathering, seated in a circle of folding chairs in a church basement, I stood up and said, I didn't win with noise, I won by refusing to vanish. Heads nodded. Tears fell. And something inside me, some bruised, quiet part, finally exhaled. 1 week later, I visited the cabin alone. The gravel crunched under my boots as I stepped out of the car. The trees were beginning to shift into fall, golden edges creeping into the green. I unlocked the door. The wood creaked the way it used to when Sofrona arrived early on Sundays to read the paper in peace. Inside, the fireplace waited cold. I lit a small fire, set my phone to Do Not Disturb, and placed a framed photo of him on the mantel. I opened my new journal, the one with the soft leather cover and thick pages, and wrote on the first page, I'm not writing for them anymore. This story belongs to me now. I let the silence settle, not the kind they forced on me, but the kind I chose. A knock at the door pulled me from the moment. I opened it slowly. Mrs. Henderson stood there, smiling, holding a peach pie. You earned peace, she said. I stepped aside and let her in. Later that evening, I stood on the porch, looking out at the lake. The moon reflected soft and steady on the water. My voice was quiet, but certain. Mom said I'd cry when she kicked me out on my birthday. She was right. I paused, feeling the wind wrap around my shoulders like a shawl. But she never expected the tears would stop. I turned the lock behind me. Not for fear, for peace. She gave me exile. I turned it into a home,